Look at this dog. He runs here. Why? He's felt the earthquake for at least 7 seconds before it happened. 7 seconds may not seem enough, but they can play an important role for survival in these situations. But some animals can feel earthquakes much earlier. Which are those animals? Let's find out. In 2011, a case occurred in Peru 3 weeks before the massive earthquake with a 7 magnitude happened. The species that lived in that zone, including mammals and birds, already left the national park in the Andes. You've probably heard stories like this before, about animals that seem to somehow feel an earthquake coming. Those kinds of similar circumstances occurred all around the world. In 2018, there was one summary with around 700 reports, most of which were anecdotes or observations by just one person, which made it difficult for scientists to explain this phenomenon scientifically. But years later, groups of scientists came together to explain this phenomenon and try to find a way to use animals to avoid the consequences of natural disasters. The purpose of this study was to discover if there's any specific behavior of animals before the earthquake occurs and how they can explain that kind of behavior. Often we hear from other people how their pets acted weirdly before an earthquake occurred, but we never paid much attention to this fact. This is why people tend to disbelieve their memories. Because there's a psychological phenomenon called hindsight bias, where people can't tell if something really happened or the mind is creating that illusion just because it's thinking about it. To prove this research, it must be based on a long period of time and not just the day the earthquake occurred. In this way, the research has definite data on how the animals behaved before and after the earthquake. This kind of research started in 2014. Researchers in a Japanese farm reviewed the amount of milk that several cows produced each day. The measurement was very manageable because most farm animals milk at least once a day. It was the simplest way to monitor their behavior and notice any changes. And the change happened. 3 weeks before the earthquake, the cows began to have less milk. Scientists have not been able to discover any accurate fact of this change and what has influenced animals to behave in this way. Regarding the unsuccessful result in this research, studies with the question didn't stop here. A few years later in Italy, researchers mounted accelerometers on cows, sheep, and dogs on a farm to track their behavior for several months. They set up a Fitbit to track the behavior of these animals, and the data showed that about 5 hours before an earthquake occurred, the animals' behavior changed a lot. Not only this, but the closer the animals were to the earthquake, the earlier their behavior changed. Maybe because the signals they felt started getting stronger. The results were pretty interesting for 2 reasons. First, they recommended that it might be possible to set up some kind of early warning system for earthquakes using farm animals in different locations. The second reason was they showed that it was not enough to trace a single animal. An accurate prediction requires data from multiple animals that interact with each other. And soon, this kind of data is expected to be gathered. At the beginning of 2020, German and Russian scientists started a project called Icarus, which tracks the movement of thousands of birds, mammals, and insects across the globe. Instead of just looking at what an animal or small group of animals is doing, the idea behind Icarus is to use computer algorithms to analyze large animal movement patterns. To do this, researchers plan to mount small transmitters to thousands of animals to send them precise information on the location, activity, and local weather conditions to an antenna mounted on the International Space Station. It's a big project and is still in its testing phase, but the goal is that as soon as possible, researchers will be able to start collecting data and see if animals can be used to predict not only earthquakes but also other natural disasters, such as volcanic eruptions. Recent advances in such things as artificial intelligence and satellite technology have made these kinds of studies easier. But despite all the evidence that some animals may be able to feel earthquakes before they occur, we still don't know how they are doing this. Some scientists think that animals can feel tremors on Earth from movements in the Earth's core just before an earthquake, but there's no strong evidence for this. It's also possible for animals to catch other environmental changes caused by these movements in the Earth's core. For example, air can be electrically charged as vibrations in the Earth's core break the chemical bond in minerals by releasing charged atoms into the air. Some animals may have the ability to catch that change in the air, but electrically charged atoms can also dissolve in water, making the water acidic. Aquatic organisms are sensitive to chemical changes in water. For example, amphibians. Their skin is permeable, and they're very affected by the slightest change in the water. This may explain why a whole group of frogs escaped from their usual pond 5 days before the earthquake occurred in L'Aquila, Italy in 2009. The scientists who observed this behavior did not measure the acidity of the water, so we don't know for sure if something like this happened. But at least there's a serious question on this topic. The more we learn about how animals behave before an earthquake and how we can detect their early signals, the more we're able to protect ourselves from these natural disasters. So don't ignore the signals of your pets. Until next time, stay safe, guys. See ya.